Thank you, Acting Speaker. Acting Speaker, I'd like to indicate at the beginning that in speaking to these bills, recognising that we're dealing with two bills in cognate, I support the amendment that has been moved by the Shadow Minister on this, but also indicate that I think, like many of my colleagues do, that if that amendment's to not succeed, these bills need to be supported. And that is because we are in a really critically important time for the aged care sector, and it's certainly in my electorate one of the most pressing issues that myself and my staff are dealing with on a regular basis. And the particular bills before us are enacting the recommendation, some of the recommendations of the Carnell-Paterson review into aged care. And in particular, it's establishing a new aged care quality and safety commission intended to be operational from the 1st of January 2019, and that will bring together quality assurance and complaints procedures in the aged care sector. That's obviously, as a result of the review, a worthwhile thing to do. But we do have some concerns, and I want to touch on those in general about the aged care sector. First of all, I want to say while this bill is definitely a movement in the right direction and it's a response to an important review, it's now in the context of the agreement to establish a Royal Commission into aged care. There is no doubt in my mind that that Royal Commission will hear very significant and important evidence across the nation from all of our communities about some of the things that are a real challenge to us as a nation in looking after our elders, and I commend the fact that that is to proceed. Having said that, it is also critically important that the things we already know are not left to languish whilst the Royal Commission occurs. There are actions that government could take, such as the legislation before us today, that can be progressed in order to make sure that we provide better care, love and attention to the elders of our community, because I don't think anybody in our community would expect any less of us in this place. And so in that context, I want to talk about two particular areas where it's one thing to have a qualities and complaints procedure, but you also need to get the other aspects of service delivery in place. One of them is around funding and delivery of services, and the other is around workforce and providing for the future, given that we know this is going to be a space where we will need increasing not only numbers but quality, skill and the staffing levels, the numbers of staff required to do the job that will be needed. Why this is so important, and why I think so many of us on this side of the House wanted to speak on the bill, is because it's critically important when you've got our elders in our communities, many of whom are living much longer, a much healthier life. They're active and participating in all sorts of activities for often decades after retirement now. It certainly is not something that our grandparents or great-grandparents' generations would have anticipated post-retirement, but that's the reality. That's a great thing. But it also means that as a result of that being more healthy, more active and more engaged, that people often are going into what we used to consider residential aged care as a more common experience. It's now becoming the case that most people go in to residential care when they're at the very critical end, and so they go in with very complex challenges and problems and need that much more professional and qualified care to be provided to them. Dementia is a major issue now. Complex health problems, people living longer means that we're more likely at the end of life to have the culmination of many of those impacts of ageing happen. But also it means, obviously, that for quite a lot longer in life, people will be looking to stay in their own homes. And we know from health outcomes that that's a much better thing for people to do. And I think there's been a very strong bipartisan view that being able to support people to stay in their homes longer is a really good thing, and it's a good policy aim. And it's certainly a big part of what drove Labor's reforms in government in the Living Longer, Living Better reforms, to make sure that people were able to be supported to do that. So what frustrates me and my community at the moment, and I've spoken in this chamber about this before, so I'll just touch on it here in this debate, is the fact that post the change of government in 2013, we have seen successive cuts to the funding in the aged care sector. And certainly I was made well aware by many of the providers in my electorate, I'm sure other colleagues had the same in their electorate, about the massive changes that were made to the funding instrument and the implications of that cut across the sector. But that continues to be the case. And like many in my community, before the last budget, the government had put out a whole lot of stories in the media about how there was going to be a big aged care boost in the budget, and I was anticipating that that would come through because, in particular, home care packages has been a real issue for people in my electorate, and we know that people are being assessed as needing the most high-level package, a level 4 package, which means that they have the highest need to be supported to stay in their own home, which consequently means if they don't get that support, they are much more likely to have to move into the residential aged care sector. And just from a purely economic perspective for government, it's better because it's more efficient and cheaper to keep people in their own home, because residential aged care per head is a much more expensive proposition. That is being frustrated by the fact that there is over 100,000 people waiting for care packages across the nation. And in my own area, that's around a bit over 1,000 people who have been assessed as needing it, who are waiting. And I'll just remind the House that those published public figures about people who are waiting for a care package does not include people who have been assessed for a higher level care and then been put on an interim lower level care package. So you might need a level 4 and there's a wait for it. So in the meantime, the government puts you on a level 2, which is obviously a lower level of support. Now, the reality of that impacts another group of people that I think this legislation and the whole issue is so important to. That's families, loved ones, carers. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've had family members in tears talking to myself or my staff, waiting for a home care package to be delivered. Because the reality is that most families who have an elderly relative are in one of two situations. They're either working themselves so that the stress and worry about being at work all day when you've got an elderly relative in their own home and not being able to pop over at lunchtime or check, if they ring and they've got a problem, duck over to see them, causes enormous pressure and stress on people, and that obviously has productivity implications for people in the workplace. So to get this right is actually a really important economic flow-on for those workers in our communities who have those caring responsibilities in families. Often people, in fact, not only are working, but the way our demographics are these days, people not having families till much later in life, often they've got kids of their own that they're also juggling in terms of childcare or school commitments and so forth at the same time that they're dealing with older parents and family members. So this is a huge issue in our communities, and it's enormous stress on people, particularly when they've got a loved one who they know has been assessed and is entitled to support, and it's taking up to a year to get that for them. And if you imagine you're the son or a daughter of an elderly person in that circumstance, where you're trying to work, you're trying to support your own family, you love this person, you try and do everything you can for them, and for month after month that pressure continues on you, even though that person has been assessed as entitled to support. It's unacceptable, and the measly 14,000 places that was in the last budget barely makes a dent on that long waiting list, and came out of residential care funding anyway, so it wasn't additional money. So for not only our loved elders in our community, but also for their families, their work colleagues, the businesses that they work for, this has real implications. And the third group of people that I want to particularly talk about in terms of the aged care sector are the providers. And by that I mean the aged care providers who are caring quality providers. In this environment with what's happening, they really are going to have a hard time of it too. So it's very unfair to those providers to be put under the pressure of funding cuts and also under the pressure of delivering quality services and trying to match those up. And I'm very conscious in my own area of providers who were running particular programs to really give some quality of life to residents who, through changes to the funding instrument and so forth, were not able to do a whole lot of things that they really wanted to do. So I want to acknowledge them in this situation. But most significantly, I want to acknowledge the aged care workers. These are just amazing people. I'm sure Acting Speaker, you will have visited aged care providers in your own area, and you would know the by and large women, but increasingly more men, working in this sector, and how deeply they care for the people that they're working for, their residents or their older people in their homes that they're visiting and providing services to. It's just an amazing aspect of this sector, how deeply dedicated the workforce are, but they're not supported. They're not supported well enough. And that means some challenges for us around female-dominated pay rates, and certainly Labor's had something to say about how we get better in that space, but also training and development. The job is becoming more complex. It requires higher levels of skill. And part of that is also about resilience, about helping people get the skills and knowledge they need to feel competent and therefore confident in their work and not to be stressed by it. And it also goes to just sheer numbers. We're all ageing. It's one of those industry sectors that's unlikely to take a downturn. We're all going to hit that point. And we are going to need a huge increase in the number of people working in the aged care sector. Now, it's already been a bit of a challenge for many providers to recruit people. Hard to get young people to see the sector as a really viable long-term career option, although it is, and it provides great career opportunities. But it's very difficult if they're seeing a sector that's under stress, under pressure, underfunded, without appropriate recognition of skills and support through upskilling and retraining. It's very hard when people look at that to encourage them to come into the sector. And so we have to get much better at that workforce planning. I do think it was a great error by the Abbott government when they were first elected to have abolished the over $1 billion workforce strategy that Labor had put in place alongside the reforms. I think that was very short-sighted. But those workers, and I just want to acknowledge, I attended a forum with many of them in Wollongong in June, and we had our local Labor council, Arthur Orris, spoke, but also Gerard Hayes from the Health Services Union, but locals, Amanda Hampton, Karen Singh, Lisa Walker and Lynn Martin, who have decades of experience in the sector amongst them. And the one thing that they were there for, wasn't actually about their own educational opportunities, their own pay rates. It was about their despair at making sure the system delivered for the people they loved and cared about, the clients that they were working with. It was just inspiring to hear that dedication. And I just want to pay huge respects to those workers and say to the whole Parliament, we need to do better. And in the final 20 seconds, many of the people I've spoken to about Acting Speaker are carers, and I want to acknowledge it is National Carers Week, and the website's up and running. Encourage people to support a carer. Go have a look at the website and support National Carers Week. Thank you.
I thank the